Welcome to Home and Away on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. Not only are you going to be hearing this on our podcast feed, but this is another cross-pollinated podcast episode, as the guest for today was also going to be the host over on his show, but we decided to do a 2-for-1. And so Trevor Everette of the Two Pointers podcast is joining me here on Home and Away. We're going to be airing this on both podcast feeds, so wherever you catch it, we hope you enjoy the content. But with that being said, Trevor, thanks for coming on the show, man. How are you doing?
I'm lovely. I'll tell you the same thing I tell everyone else whenever I get to talk draft. I'm happy. Like I told you before we started, man, like this whole draft stuff and getting used to it and like the list of guys I used to look at. And now all of a sudden I'm like, man, these lists are 150 some long. And I love this stuff. And I'm super excited to talk a few discrepancies with you, I think, as we'll call it. We don't have a funny title. I was going to try to workshop that title with you, but at this point, I don't know. I like the discrepancy report was all I had, and I was like, that doesn't sound fun. But we'll talk about it.
We'll brainstorm something after the fact. Don't worry. But for anyone new to Home and Away on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed, the whole point of this show is to get an outsider's perspective on the NBA draft, on basketball at large, on the inner workings of scouting, whatever the case may be, whatever we decide to talk about. We want an outsider's perspective. And Trevor is the perfect example of that because he follows all basketball, right? He covers the NBA, covers the NBA draft for his show, the Two Pointers podcast. And we're going to share some in-person scouting stories kind of as we go about this podcast, given some of the topics we're going to be discussing. But Trevor, I just want to get a quick intro from you as far as how did you get started in the whole podcasting scene and basketball evaluation? And like, where did you get your start? And why are you here today specifically as a podcaster and a basketball analyst?
So my intro story, I always tell it because it's not like, I don't tell it all the time because it's not fun. I just tell it because it honestly isn't as fun as most people's, I guess. It's not like, here's this long drawn out thing that happened to me that caused me to do this. I've always cared about basketball. I've always cared about, I knew I had at a not a young age, but I knew that I wanted to get into sports media in some form or fashion, just be able to put out stuff and see what it did. And that's kind of the world we live in, and starting out with like your Bleacher Report Instagram pages, following those back when we were all, I don't know how old you are, but relatively young for me. They were out there, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is fun. This is how I keep up with it. But I also watched, as a Lakers fan, I would stay up super late and watch all these games. So I'm like, this is just something I really enjoy to do. I knew there was a passion. Fast forwarding a long time, 2020, a good friend of mine that I've known for a long time, my former co-host, I had brought the idea to him just as like no offense to any of my other friends that a few of them have been on the show, but I try to keep it to people who I know and I trust and I know cover this stuff and do a really good job with it. I knew he was the only one that would take it seriously. So I was like, cool, let's workshop this. And next thing you know, we spent 4.5 hours one night just sitting down, figuring it all out. Our first ever show was 2.5 hours long, and we were like, this is not going to fly. So we got to figure something out. Next thing you know, I would say based on statistics, we did a pretty good job of understanding how we grew and just figuring it out. I realized it was something I really wanted to do and really pursue as a career soon. So I had to really pivot to sum up the story. He actually works in athletics in a school here in North Carolina. I'll save the details, unfortunately, but he had to step away. So I had a complete pivot 3 weeks before the NBA season this year, going from having somebody like you to talk to every single time. You had a consistent schedule, you had a co-host, and you had a way of doing things that you were familiar with, and all of a sudden being like, well, how do I talk to myself into a camera? That's the part I'm going to have to understand. So long story short, I've been doing this now, and the growth has been awesome. I've really enjoyed it. I covered the NBA, like you said, the NBA draft at large relatively, and then college basketball this year was a big focus for me. I'm now actually, because of that, a contributor to the Everything College Basketball podcast, as well as a freelance writer for House of College Hoops. So long-winded, but that is the totality. I gave you the easiest 2 minutes I could give you on how we've ended up here. There's a lot of random other details, but that is the kind of the fun 2 minutes I give people. I wish it was fun.
Listen, Trevor, I know the pain firsthand of having a show with inconsistent guest spots as the kind of go-to for how to run the show. I didn't have Maxwell and Steven as co-hosts when Draft Deeper first formed, right? So any OG fans of the Draft Deeper podcast, you've heard me speak into a mic for 2.5 hours at a time, going through chunks of my big board or a mock draft or wherever the case may be. So I appreciate the hustle. I appreciate the grind, Trevor. I know you know your stuff. And I know that you, like me, you have this desire to not only grow within the sports media landscape, you want to get better as an evaluator and as a scout. And that's what I'm going to find really fun about this show. You kind of said it at the top. The whole point of what we wanted to do is an exercise in which we wanted to examine our big boards and take a look at some of the biggest differences we have for multiple prospects. So we have 3 prospects that we have picked out for that specific exercise. And then we will talk about a few other guys towards the end of this that Trevor specifically wanted to bring up. And I was like, I listen, you can throw any names at me if it's draft related. I'm going to be all for talking about them. So I'm not afraid of anything in that space. But let's start out with a player you actually have not just a first round grade on him. You have him pretty comfortably inside your top 20 in Kansas's Jalen Wilson. So when we talk about differences on our big boards, I updated my board a little bit over the weekend, so I cheated a little bit as to when we put this outline together, but I still have him at 38. So there's a 20 spot difference between the two of us. That is not small, my friend. That is significant, especially when we talk about what it means when you rate somebody as a first round prospect. I take that very seriously because that means you're projecting them to make it to a second contract and potentially play out 10 plus years in the NBA or have a meaningful role within an 8-9 man rotation. Like that to me is a very serious grade. If you're to have like a second round grade or an undrafted free agent grade, it's not that I don't see NBA potential within you. Clearly, if you're in my top 60, I think you're going to make the league and you're going to have some sort of start to your career in the NBA at the very least. But I'm not projecting your career to be on the same arc as if I were grading you inside my top 20. So with that being said, Trevor, I am very curious, and I know you'll want my thoughts. Trust me, I'll give you my thoughts as well. But I'm very curious as to why you have Jalen Wilson inside of the top 20 on your big board.
So this is a multi-part answer, and I'll tell you why. So I cheated a little bit too. I went in this weekend with the very little time I had left before this to just sure up some things. The problem is I want people to understand the way I do my boards is I do them month to month, a completely 30-day cycle. So this is April 1st's opinion. So I'm talking backwards a little bit. We're now doing this on April 17th.
It's fair.
And I'll be honest with you, that is not where he will be in 12 days. That is just full transparency. That's what's going to change. And part of this conversation is going to help shape that. There were some things that I rewatched that were very eye-opening. And also the other thing that kind of threw me off too was just the amount of guys, and this is part of the reason I do it from April to May and May to June, is I think Steven said it to me once. It was like, the assignment's not due. Your assignment's not due till June 22nd. How you do it's up to you, right? But at the same time, the amount of guys that changed or like basically went in, withdrew and decided to go back and yada, 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 that's going to change a ton. Because like I think I have Cal Filipowski in the mid-20s. That's a guy that he's going to end up like he would have obviously maybe gone up a little bit higher. Jalen would have come down. It's like those guys are going to start fluctuating those positions. And in the 20s, it's hard for me to draw straws in the 20s. So it's like, things are going to happen. These are going to change.
The cupboard runs bare in this draft pretty quickly once you get to about 27, 28, 29. So
my opinion on that's changed a couple times. I think I'm going to land in there's a lot of guys that I like at least one thing about. The problem is it might not be an NBA skill. That's the part that I'm having to struggle with. So Jalen's is kind of teetering on that line, and I won't delay it any longer. The problem for me is everyone has a thing or an archetype or a favorite that they fall into. Mine is productive college guys. I'm always going to give them the one up over somebody that might be showing me reasons to think that they're, regardless if they're 18 or not, like a guy we'll talk about in a minute. I just think the college production is unbelievable, regardless of any of the stuff. I think the ability to create on the dribble has improved over the year. I know that was something that, early on in his college career was not good at all. And we saw that get better. But obviously, when you have a team that changed completely and he becomes the full focal point, I think that was very important, the dribble improvement. But the other part I like is just sometimes I look at a guy and I go, do you just fit the NBA body? Do you fit the NBA mold? And I think 6'8", 210, the ability to at least use his body to make up for some of the defense stuff that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in just a second. That is the unfortunate part of why he'll be falling for me. But I think some of just the NBA body stuff and just having the ability to look like a pro, I sometimes have to give guys that benefit of the doubt. And then obviously we know offensively what he showed this year in a lot of different aspects that I'm sure we'll talk about here as well. Not a convincing case for me, I'll tell you the truth. But again, I caveated the way I did.
Yeah, I think the points that you brought up regarding the self-creation, the physical tools, the plus size for a guy who's likely to play the 3 position or maybe possibly be a big 2. I like all of those points, and they're big reasons why I still have him inside my top 40.
Right.
The issues I have with Jalen Wilson are not talent related. They really aren't, right? And you may have some negatives to point out on defense. I'm sure we could nitpick. I actually don't think the defense is that bad. My issue is offensively throughout his entire career, some of the raw numbers have been there. You pointed out his production this year, about 20 points, the raw production's there, but the efficiency has not been there at any point in his career. And the efficiency hasn't been there in a low volume role or a high volume role. Right. So if I'm looking at Jalen Wilson as a late first round, early second round pick, and I'm a team drafting him, and then I have to go tell my coach, this is the guy who we're taking with a late first round, early second round pick. He obviously needs an opportunity to prove himself, especially if he's taken inside the first round or if he's even taken higher than the late first round. He's going to need some minutes, and he's going to need a chance to prove himself. But if I'm the coach sitting there, I don't know what I'm going to get from Jalen Wilson on a night-to-night basis, specifically in terms of efficiency. What am I really looking at with him, right? So, yeah, he can put up 20 points per game in college, but if it takes him X amount of shots to get to that number and he's not going to have that same type of role in the NBA and he's only playing 10 to 12, 14 minutes a night, I'm just not confident in the type of production that I'm going to be getting from Jalen Wilson at the pro level in comparison to the college level. Now, he's a guy who I think the spot up shot has improved, but it's not great. The biggest leap, in my opinion, that he took on offense was he did show some really nice passing flashes. They just weren't consistent, which plays into this whole case that I'm quote unquote building against him. But the other thing was the off the dribble shooting, right? His mid-range shooting did take a nice step up this year. The problem is, how many of those same opportunities is he going to get in the NBA? I feel he's going to have to prove himself first and foremost as a spot-up shooter. Then he's going to have to prove himself as somebody who can not only get the ball on the move, cut into the basket, or coming off a 45 action or whatever the case may be. But once he gets that ball, it's not just about scoring. He's also going to have to prove that he can show some of that live dribble passing that he showcased and sort of redirect the ball, keep it moving within the offense. And when he handles both of those things to a certain degree, then his role is going to be able to build out. Maybe he does get more touches in spots where he wants the ball. So that's really my concern with Jalen Wilson. I don't know how you feel about any of that before you possibly unpack some of your defensive concerns, but that's really just been my story of, yeah, I see the talent. I'm not going to knock him too far down my board, but I haven't given him a first round grade for quite a while this season.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil where he ends up necessarily, but it's going to be a teetering decision for me. The issue I have defensively, and like I try to, again, the one thing I try to lean on for guys is the NBA skill. It's like I'm sitting here going for any guy in the first round, for any guy, honestly, in my entire board is what is the one thing, if you're going to make it, whether it's a second contract or not, that's a good point. I never thought of it that way with the first round where it's like, okay, I think you're probably going to make a second contract in the league. And that's actually a really good way to look at it. And I'm sure there's someone out there that is crazy enough to go find out how many guys in the last, say, 10 years were, made it to a second contract in the first round. I'm sure there's some numbers out there, and I'm sure we could figure it out. And that's actually a really cool thing to probably find out. But his NBA skill that I think is, like you said, some of that shot creation stuff is really good. The problem is, I agree with you. The efficiencies are not there. And like an NBA team is going to hold that against him until he proves it, which is why I think sometimes where I value guys in the first round, just because I think you might be a G League player for a couple of years and then show it and then come back up and maybe have an opportunity. I'm not going to hold that against somebody for where I might value them. Now, I do agree. There are some guys around him that I felt better about up and down that ultimately he was a casualty of. There was guys ahead of them I liked more or better, or guys around him. And I think he's just going to end up falling because of that. And the college production was what helped keep me in that same range. And I know 18's high. Honestly, it hasn't really changed much this year. It falls into the kind of the Johnny Juzang trap for me. I loved Johnny Juzang. Did not have him as a first rounder, but the point is I love that kind of college production where I'm like, I'm like, something's going to translate. And the point I'm making long-winded is I think Wilson's was going to be defense. And then I did the deep dive I was talking about. I had all this stuff written down about what I saw originally. And then I looked into it again. and I want to hear your opinion on it. The isolation defense is really bad. Like it's a lot of the points per possession stuff is really bad, but like I watched whatever, I think there's 64 clips or whatever it is on Synergy of him in isolation defense, and I think he probably got scored on 54 times, 52 times. I mean, it's just a matter of like, I want to see at least a consistent stop. And honestly, I didn't want to come into this and be negative, but I think it's partly for my own good that we needed to do this way. So I'm okay with being like, yeah, I have him at 18, but here's all the stuff I said at the beginning for a reason to preface why he's probably not going to be 18 any longer. So I know you said you think the defense is okay in some spots. What is it that's not? Like, I know the isolation is the one thing I honed in on, but is there another place that might be something that I or somebody might be missing defensively?
So the thing about defense in the NBA, if you're playing on the wing, especially at that 3 position now, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that we can talk about across the NBA landscape, although by average height in the NBA, the number hasn't really shifted up as much as we would expect based on some of the research that I've done. But you do look around and you just get the feeling positionally, each position has kind of gone up in size, right? So when you're guarding other threes, you have to be ready to play up against size. You have to be able to body up other matchups. You have to be a certain level of tough on that side of the ball. I don't get that impression from Jalen Wilson, and I think that's a big reason why you mentioned the isolation defense. Bingo. I think he's going to struggle against some individual matchups at that position. Now, if you play him as a shooting guard, then where that gets tricky is, yeah, he might be better off in some situations defensively, which technically that's true. Your position is generally described as who you guard in the NBA. Yeah. But if he's going to be your other quote unquote guard next to a point or maybe a combo, you're going to expect more creation from him on the offensive side of the ball. And while he did rate out in the 77th percentile scoring out of pick and rolls in college this year, at the same time, playing pick and roll in the NBA is a completely different animal, right? The speed of the game, the physicality of the game, the decisions you have to make at the drop.
How it's defended is another one. I think it's how it's defended completely, because there's going to be way more athletic bigs that are going to tear him apart. That, like, you know, I'm just giving his teammate KJ Adams an example here. Like, KJ Adams is, you know, somebody that in the, or a, you know, throwing out like another, I know a Dembona is a favorite one for you guys, of somebody that, like, I think can do that at the college level and defend it very well. But there are 50 of those guys in the NBA that know how to defend the pick and roll, and it is scary.
Yeah, so I don't see where the type of production that Jalen Wilson showcased in college is going to translate to the NBA level. It's really funny you mentioned Juzang. Like, coming into Kentucky, right? I was a Johnny Juzang guy. I thought he was going to be awesome. Didn't work out for him at Kentucky. Didn't really get a fair opportunity. Transferred out to UCLA. He went on that magical tournament run, but when you watched him at the NBA draft combine, though, Trevor, you saw what kind of trouble he was going to potentially be in at the NBA level. Like, he just could not create or get around anybody, period. And so he was settling for tough jumper after tough jumper. And you wonder a little bit if that's going to be the story of Jalen Wilson as well, right? And if you don't believe that he's a guy who can break down defenses or break down defenders one-on-one or play out of some of those common possession types like we talked about, you're making a scary proposition to take him too high in the draft. Now, if you have an early mid-second round pick and you want to take a flyer on somebody who's coming from, 4 years at Kansas, playing in one of the best conferences in college basketball in the Big 12, I'm not going to argue with you on that. But just I hesitate with giving him a first round grade. And I think that's where a lot of our differences came. But it sounds like you've eased off that 18 grade a little bit, and you're going to come back a little bit more towards my way. Maybe not settle where I am.
It's going to depend on how many guys in the that I had in the first, and that I do the same exact, because the way I do deep dives, we throw that term around a lot. The way I do them is I try to find one thing that I think got better or improved, or I really, really love again, or maybe like another thing. So like if it's, Victor Wembanyama, right? Very easy to be like, there's a thing I like. Great. What did he improve on also, though?
Sure.
Obviously, he's not moving for one, but the point is like, I go back, and even with guys like him and Scoot, like, I go, okay, what is the one thing? I don't spend forever on them, because I think a deep dive can be valuable on look for a skill that either improved or that you were maybe wrong about. And with Wilson's, it was that defense that I know that some of that stuff is good. I did go back and look at some of it again just now. I know the isolation defense was pretty eye-opening, but it's going to depend on a lot of the guys in the 20s that some of those skills. A lot of those guys in the 20s, if I remember correctly, went back to college. So, you know, that's obviously going to matter too. You know, spots are going to start moving and opening up. But yeah, there's some things that I really like. Like I said, I think he's going to be a guy that's really going to, I think there's a few of these guys every year. You mentioned the combine. I think sometimes just the 3-on-3s, that just some guys just prove themselves. And I will talk about a guy in a few minutes that I think really will prove himself in that position, but, or could in any setting like that. But I think he's going to really have to be a guy that proves it, because I know in transition he can be dangerous as well. There's just some things in spot up that I'm just like, they're not, like you said it earlier, they're not going to give him the leash. The leash is not there. You're not being handed the keys, and you got to give me an NBA skill that you're going to be really good at. And I'm struggling to still figure out exactly what that is. So again, I hate to be negative Nancy, but I'm going to end up in the place where I'm like, you know what? It's okay. 18 was where I had him for a while, and it was the production keeping him there. And I'm okay with realizing we've made it to that point in the year where he doesn't deserve to be there anymore. Like, it is.
Trevor. Let me be negative Nancy with Jalen Wilson. You're about to shine a very positive light with this next guy that you wanted to talk about. Jalen Slawson out of Furman is exactly who you were referencing. Now, you actually have him on your board right now, or you did, according to you did, at 30, right? I have not had him ranked in my top 60 up to this point. Now, admittedly, that's going to change because we're getting the windfall of prospects who are declaring, prospects who aren't going to be in the draft. And so by default, there are a lot of veteran names who are going to start leaking into the back end of my second round. And some of those guys, I said it on an episode that I recorded last night when Draft Deeper published the morning of when we're recording this podcast. Pay attention to some of these second round names that we're talking about, or guys that are sleepers really breaking in, because some of them are going to rise up to the top 45, depending on how many of these underclassmen actually stay in the draft. And Slawson could very well be one of those guys that starts creeping the back end of my board, and then slowly moves his way up to the top 50. Maybe he even cracks that top 45 range. I won't rule out that possibility, but you need to sell me on Slawson. I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because at times I've spoken with Maxwell, one of my co-hosts over at Draft Deeper. I've kind of compared Slawson to like a poor man's Jalen Wilson. So it's actually really funny. We had the Jalen Wilson conversation first. You want to talk to me about his athleticism and what you've actually seen from him a little bit up close and personal. I don't buy the athleticism as much with Slawson, nor do I buy the decision-making with him. Now, my caveat to the decision-making is sometimes players are kind of forced to be in a certain spot when making decisions for their team, because they're quite literally the only guy who can get their offense at times. And for this Furman team, it's Slawson or bust. And that pretty much broke its way out in the NCAA tournament. So I can give him a pass in some respects, but I don't always love how he's going about getting his points, his shots on the court. I know why you're in love with him, though, and I know why you have a first-round grade on him, because he was a very productive fifth-year player in college. He did carry that Furman team in many respects, and these are reasons why he needs to be valued as a potential NBA draft prospect at a legitimate 6'8", 6'7", 210 pounds. Like you talked about it with Jalen Wilson, the eye test for Wilson. You can also say that Jalen Slawson also passes the NBA wing eye test, right? If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it may very well be a duck.
I was literally about to say that.
Why don't you talk to me a bit about why you like Jalen Slawson and why he has a first-round grade on your board?
So you mentioned Maxwell, and I can't wait to talk to Maxwell hopefully in the next couple of weeks before June 22nd. But I mean, I will not be prepared for sleeper conversations with him. I know for a fact. But Slawson is a guy that I think people for a long time were valuing as a sleeper. So two things. One, I may or may not have shed a very small tear when he backed out of Portsmouth about 2 days before.
We all shed a tear, my friend. Trust me.
I was not happy. I was a very unhappy camper. But I will say I have to give credit to his teammate Mike Bothwell, who was there, had a really good time. We'll talk about some of the other guys there in a few minutes, like I said. Yep. But he wasn't, nothing jumped off the page, but he was another guy that was really productive for Furman. But politely, I do think it was pretty much Slawson or bust. Nothing against Mike Bothwell. So a couple things. The athleticism stuff, I didn't like when you watch a guy on film, and this is something I'm trying to get better at. We talk about the improvement as an evaluator. So when you watch stuff on film, there's just things that sometimes just don't come through. Like you're like, okay, I see this, maybe whatever. That's why I really I don't take in person lightly. Like I like to try to, and I've said this 1,000 times for those of you that are on this home and away that are listening on my channel are going to be like, wow, I feel like I've heard this a few times. And for your listeners and for No Ceilings listeners, this will be a new story for them, or this will be a new thing. But I value a couple things. I value athleticism because obviously when you're in person, and I'm 5'9", and I'm, whatever. I don't even know how much I weigh. I know that these guys are bigger, faster, better, stronger than me. That is not the point. But when I am able to see that at work against other guys of their size and their speed, that is something I take, like I said, I take very, very strongly. And I recall the play where I was at Furman came to Raleigh, where I'm based, and they played NC State, who doesn't have a stellar wing defender. Let's just be real for a second. Casey Morcell's not bad, but I would call him more of a small guard than anything.
But they do have legitimate athletes on that roster though, in Jarquin Winter and Terquavian Smith. So like they have guys who have NBA level speed,
but not Jalen Slawson level size and athleticism. That was the part that I was concerned about. So I was like, okay, he's going to tear them apart, and I think he finished with 2 points. So. And the shooting was horrible, but it improved as we saw over the year.
He had 6 points and 7 rebounds in that game, 2 of 8 from the floor, 1 of 6 from three-point range. It's
about as bad as it sounded, right? And it looked just as bad. So he had a play. I was sitting under the basket. I got these tickets. This wasn't a media event, unfortunately for me, but I got these tickets. I think I was literally the first row behind the cheerleaders on the floor. So I was like, cool, good seats. Let's see how Furman does. And he had this play, and I know this is something that people talk about. They're like, guys do this, and they do the funny things with the ball. And whatever. He caught the ball when I draw the rectangle, like, you have the rectangle of the backboard, but then you have the actual backboard itself that's a rectangle. He caught the ball outside of the rectangle of the backboard and was able to put one of those 6 points down. Like, I've never in my life seen a guy grab a ball, like, in a place where I didn't think he could reach it. And I don't know his wingspan. For some reason, maybe they haven't. I know they're going to officially measure guys in the future, but just some of the stuff and some of the pop and the understanding of knowing where to be. And I'm completely transitioning away from the athleticism story for a second. His off-ball movement is just. I think he's just super. You mentioned decision making. I think he was forced into that offensively, but I think some of the defensive versatility is just like I can sit here in my own accord and be like, the fact that him and Jalen Wilson are the same measurable, almost identical. But then what he's able to do offensively, and I do think his wingspan is plus by
Slawson is bigger than Jalen Wilson. Like if Slawson would have been at Portsmouth and he would have got measured out, I do think we would have been happy with his measurements. Let's remember Jalen Wilson last year at the combine, he was actually under 6'6" without shoes. So he's not even really getting the 6'7". So he actually measured out a little on the small side. I do believe what Slawson's listed at by Furman. I believe those measurements when you watch him on tape.
That's I know that Wilson, I think, is listed close to 6'7". Yep. So either way, the fact that they're even remotely, counting height, I know we say counting stats, but like if we just look at what they're listed, it seems like that something's off about it. And I think you're right. Wilson may be measuring down a little bit. The frame for finishing is going to be really important in the NBA level. He's going to be able to finish through contact. Something he's doing right now, I think, very well. Again, I always harp back to what is your NBA skill? And I think just being a versatile defender with really long arms that I think is athletic enough to be able to, if he is beaten on some kind of, pick and roll switch or some kind of, any kind of on-ball ability, he'll be able to recover. And where I think the weak side is going to be really important for him. And I think he does a decent job as a weak side defender now. And that's only some of what I had. I did have decision-making as a weakness written down. So when you get to some of the other, actually, you know what? I'll say this now. You mentioned the offensive stuff with him being the only guy. Honestly, one of the things I took away from in person with him was he seems very passive, but I think that was just the style of offense that they were in. And I just don't understand. He got to unlock it more. We saw the shooting improve. Like the counting stats and the percentages for the shots improved. And I think that was important for him. And I think that's why a lot of people, especially in your case, will eventually maybe look at those again and maybe look at the year as a broad, I know he's a fifth year, but this is the year that's the most valuable for what we're watching. And we see what he's improved on. I think that'll be really important to see is how the offense improved later in the year when he started to almost be like, hey, here's the keys and go. And he did a very good job of that. But I did have passive and decision-making written down as a weakness also.
So here's the thing about Slawson, where I too really wish he would have been at Portsmouth. And you actually got an up close and personal seat at Portsmouth. We will talk about more of that in a second with D'Moi Hodge. We want to talk a little bit about D'Moi Hodge. But another top Portsmouth performer, I have a lot of the same concerns about him as a prospect that I do Slawson. And his name was Toumani Camara.
Now, I knew it.
Toumani Camara, lo and behold, when he was actually paired with guards who knew how to get him the ball and set him up for success in the spots where he was best with the ball, he looked freaking awesome at Portsmouth, man. Like he brought the building down. He's the one guy coming out of that event, other than maybe some of the Hodge fans who already existed or anybody who wants to put Sir Jabari Rice back into the conversation in the second round. Like outside of those two guys, Kamara's the guy who everyone's walking away like he's an NBA guy. Like he's going to go to the combine. He's probably going to get a real chance to prove he's worth a second round pick. And it's amazing what happens sometimes when you take the ball out of their hands, you ask them to do what they should be doing within the role that's best for them, and you see the results play out. And when you do look at a lot of Slawson's play types and where he's most efficient at per synergy, a lot of them are when those opportunities are created for him, right? When he's not asked to take jump shots off the dribble, where he was 2 of 16 this past year in taking those types of shots. When he is purely a spot up, catch and shoot, catch it, cut, finish at the rim guy, it's amazing what he can do on offense. And then defensively, you talked about it perfectly. He is very active on the defensive end. He, especially in those 2 tournament games, like even when the shot wasn't falling against like San Diego State, for example, or when he didn't get as many shots as we probably would have expected him to have against Virginia, he was all over the place trying to do things defensively. And that type of effort level, that understanding, that awareness on that side of the ball, that's going to earn him minutes to prove himself as an offensive player, wherever he ends up, wherever he goes. And if he's playing with guys who don't ask too much of him, he can be someone who maybe he only gets 5-6 shots in a game, but if he gets those shots in the right spots, maybe he's making 4 or 5 out of 6 or 7 of them. And his percentages look a lot better than what they could be when he's asked to do too much, like that NC State game that you referenced, for example, where he was 2 for 8. There is a legitimate pathway for Slawson to be a guy that comes out of this draft class who was taken, mid to late second round. And we all look around when he's putting up decent numbers for a rookie within his role. And we're all looking around going, why wasn't he potentially a first round pick, right? He was a guy, sure, he's a 5th-year guy, but we saw him in big moments against big teams. And in some of those games, he actually did show up in one way or another, whether it was offense or defense, or in that Virginia game, really, it was both ends of the floor where he showed up. So that's kind of where I come back to you, Trevor, where I do need to do a second pass on Slawson now that we're finding out more about what the field of this draft is going to look like. And maybe he is somebody who, like I said, he creeps on my board. Maybe he gets inside that top 45 and starts to make a little bit of noise.
So I'm going to ask you this because I think this is important in the context of, and don't kick me from the StreamYard when I say this, but comps I think can be valuable. And I just want to be clear. And I say comps, I mean, here's how I do them. I'm
going to tell you straight up, Trevor, you can always use comps with me, and you can use comps with anyone in the basketball industry, because I promise you, there are people on social media who say that comps are not valuable, that comps can measure down a player or measure up a player. What I say is, I promise you, if you talk to people in front offices, you talk to other scouts, they use comps all the time.
All the time.
If you can't use comps, if you can't use comps, they're not going to take you seriously as an evaluator. I'm just saying, for anyone in the audience who doesn't like using comps, do it however you want to do it. Whether it's a direct 1-to-1 comp. I don't always love 1-to-1 comps, but even like we do in No Ceilings, like shades of, like, who does this player remind you of? You have to be able to tell someone who's never watched this player before what they can expect when they turn on the tape for them. And I don't know how you illustrate that picture without using some sort of comp. So by all means, go ahead, Trevor.
No, and so it's actually, I wasn't going to give you one because I'm actually curious your answer. But the reason and you said reminds of, and that is exactly how I do my comps. I do not post them publicly because I do not believe in it, because I don't believe it. Well, sorry, let me take that back. I don't believe in what the people. I don't want the backlash for no reason. I think people are going to take it out of context, so I don't care.
Social media is a different animal. I get it completely, my friend.
So when I look at them, I know Kevin O'Connor sometimes lazily will say shades of, and it literally won't make any sense. So I say reminds me of, because I started out and I grew up as an NBA fan, so that was the first thing I had to learn, and that was the first type of game. And I know the game's changed since then, but even regardless being here in Tobacco Road for college basketball, the NBA was still the first thing I always watched and the first thing I always tracked. So I'm always going to have a better understanding of some of the people I've seen. So the reason I bring up the reminds of is like, I really don't have one for him. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. So my question for you would be, how do you, now that you know how I value comps, like I just want to get a general idea of it, help me compartmentalize a player. Let me just make sure I don't have one written down, to be fair. I do not. Okay. So who is when you watched him, for whether it's the first time or whether it's, maybe you can answer this question in better detail later after you do another look back, but what is somebody current or old that you watch and you're like, that's who Slawson reminds me of?
I'm telling you that legitimately Jalen Wilson. Like I'm not BSing you when I use that name. No, I'm dead serious.
Established, right? So I think would be the other word.
if Slawson is the best version of himself, he's probably looking like Jalen Wilson on his best days, right? He's hitting spot up shots. He's cutting towards the basket. He is finding other guys off a live dribble. And then when Wilson has his motor running hot on the defensive end, now you and I can have a conversation. We just did about how sometimes that's not the case, but when it is, Jalen Wilson's capable of making some chase down blocks and playing some passing lanes and forcing some deflections, just like Slawson. So on his best days, I feel like that's the type of wing that you're buying Slawson can be, wing/combo forward. And if that's within his realm, we do need to have a much more serious conversation about Slawson, like you're bringing to the table on this podcast.
Does he not remind you of Herb Jones a little bit? Like, take the offensive stuff aside. No. Like, just throw the offense out the window.
No. So when Herb Jones was at Alabama, it's not just the defensive stuff that he showed in those tools. Even since his freshman year, you could see how he handled the ball and how comfortable he was making decisions for others. And that's why when I was working at the scouting service that I was once upon a time, when Herb Jones was a freshman, I remember a guy by the name of Jake Pavorsky. Shout out to Jake if he would ever come across this podcast. He works for the basketball tournament now, does some operation stuff with them. But he walked into our office the one day and he's like, Herb Jones, I'm telling you, he's going to be a player one of these days. I promise you. And you go back and you watch Herb Jones's development on the offensive end. He was never a shooter, but just his comfort level handling the ball, making decisions for others, as well as finding opportunities for himself inside the arc, coupled with the consistent defensive activity and lockdown potential that he has. I think Herb Jones is one of those unique players. I don't want to use him as a comp for somebody. It's really funny. So this is kind of like off topic, but I keep hearing in the draft circle, who's going to be this year's Jalen Williams? And I want to tell everyone who says that there will not be another Jalen Williams. Jalen Williams is such a unique
friend of the program
prospect, friend of the No Ceilings Pro. Thank you, Trevor.
You got to be clear on that. I mean, friend of the program.
J-Dub. Yeah. He is as unique of a player, I think, now looking back retrospectively, as we could have possibly had in the draft last year. So there are just some guys I avoid using comps for. I do see where you're going with Slawson in that regard. I personally wouldn't use that as a comp, but that doesn't mean it's a bad comp, man. You are welcome to bring your own ideas to the table. So
that's what's interesting is like, I don't have one and I don't force myself to have one. And now if I don't tweet for the next 4 hours, it's because I'm still trying to figure one out. That's just where I led with that. I know we have others to get to. I will say the one thing that I want your answer on in a few weeks when you do your another dive on him was the other weakness I had. I don't want to be negative Nancy, but I feel like in my sell me this pen at the very beginning of Jalen Slawson's segment.
Oh man, you are No Ceilings faithful through and through.
Well, it's a great, it's a
Maxwell, Corey.
It's the perfect brainchild. I'm also a fan of the movie, but it's a perfect brainchild of like, and obviously they got into a very heated debate, but it's also the perfect idea of being like, this is almost the same idea, but it was just based on the fact that we had differences in boards, and it has nothing to do with selling the person. I value what you think, and I value some of the stuff that I still also believe, and that's why I think this is so interesting, because it's like, I think we both are right in our own regard, but where we have these guys, like I can totally understand now that you've explained Jalen Wilson a little bit better why I'm probably going to have him in almost the same place, and I don't feel bad about it. It happens, but I did have post offense written down for Jalen Slawson as a weakness, because I feel like with that kind of size and that kind of frame and that kind of body and all of those taglines for that kind of thing, I was just kind of not impressed. And again, I don't want to be negative Nancy on this podcast. I'm supposed to be selling you Jalen Slawson, but I think it's something that I'm looking for as an improvement, because I think a lot of the, when he's given the ball, what is he doing with it, right? And I know that post was something that they, ran a lot of that kind of in, out, outside, whatever post stuff. But the point I was making was a lot of his off-ball stuff with offense was really good. So I was like, well, I have to want to believe if a guy's going to succeed, he's got to at least do something when he has the ball in the hand, which is kind of the idea I got from the Herb Jones thing. Was like, I saw where you were going with that. And Herb Jones, yes, is obviously way better of an offensive player. I am not naive, but
so Slawson was 17 out of 45 on shots in the post. So 38% on a play type that's primarily around the basket. That's not going to get it done.
Yeah, no.
The other thing about playing out of the post is you do have to have an idea of when you are a double in the post, you got to be able to redirect that ball and get it to where it needs to go. Slawson averaged 3.2 assists per game. But if you compare that as far as his turnovers are concerned, it was 115 assists on the year to 93 turnovers. So that's not terribly far away from like a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. So that comes back into if you give him too much responsibility, you ask him to do one too many things, is he going to bring you the results that you want, or is he more of a play finisher on the offensive end? Now, again, if he is that high-level play finisher, if he's someone where you set him up, he can make that play for you, and then he's bringing what he is on the defensive end at his size in that positional archetype, that's what NBA teams want. So again, maybe this is all playing into, you have some thoughts about him, I have some thoughts about him, but when we marry those two thoughts together, that we get to the point that, NBA teams should be interested in him regardless because of the positives that he brings to the table. And sometimes you just have to focus on the positive, not necessarily all the negatives. It's best to figure out what a player can do to integrate them into what you want to do versus just purely focus on what they can't do and write them off because of X, Y, and Z. If that's how you're going to approach basketball in every sense, then what are we doing? We're also supposed to enjoy the game as much as we are critiquing these guys, right? They're all young. Even a guy like Slawson who's been in college for 5 years, he's still young. I mean, we can't technically put a ceiling on him.
So you're not an ageist. That's good.
I am not an ageist.
Good.
We're talking about D'Moi Hodge today. He was like 24 and a half. I can't be an ageist.
Everybody I've talked to, for the most part, is not one either. I just want to be, and I don't judge anybody if they are. Like, I can understand guys that are like, and we're going to talk two of the next three guys are going to be raw young prospects. So this is totally fine. That's why I'm glad I asked the ageist question now, because we're going to literally talk about two guys that are super young and super raw. So just a good, I want to just make sure where we were on the same page. That's all.
Completely fair, my friend. So let's dig into some of the other guys that we have. Really the last guy where we have bigger differences on our board. Maybe we still do. Maybe we still don't. Rayan Rupert actually fits this big wing mold. And he's very interesting. 6'7" with a reported 7'2" wingspan. When you watch him on tape, boy, does he look like one mammoth of a man out there. You have him at 35 on your board. I have him at 20 currently. I had him a little bit higher than that, brought him a little bit back down over the weekend, but we are still 15 spots apart. I can understand more so now why you would be lower on him, and I don't know if you're still as low on him, but the offense scares me more than it did after my first run through. If you look at all of the numbers, they are horrible in every sense offensively. There is not one area in particular where he stands out right now, and you say that's going to translate to the NBA. I do like when you brought up at the beginning of the podcast, you were referencing you like to look for guys who have at least 1 to 2 tailor-made NBA-ready skills that a coach can point to and say, I'm putting you on the floor for that reason. That's why you're going to get in the game. A lot of my draft philosophy hovers around that same line of thinking. So to that point, Rayan Rupert's offensive case should scare the living daylights out of other scouts. But I will give credit to Rafael Barlow for doing this interview with Rayan Rupert. His sit down with him opened my eyes back up slightly, because Rupert talked about how he wasn't always this big. He wasn't always this long. He actually grew up playing a point guard role, so he had to handle the ball. He had to create for others. He had to create more for himself off the dribble, and he is confident that eventually he's going to be bringing those skills into the NBA. So if he has that base, right? If he has that base skill, and we give him a slight pass for playing up in the NBL, which is one of the most physical leagues that we have in the entire world, right? Any of the youngsters who have come out of the NBL, they have not posted high shooting percentages. I'm not going to recite you all those numbers off the top of my head, but Maxwell in particular, I love bringing up my guy Maxwell. He's one of the best scouts we have in this space, period. So I'm lucky I get to work with him on a day-to-day basis. But he did a study on a lot of those prospects that we've seen go to the NBL and then come out to the NBA draft, since that started being a trend a few years ago with LaMelo Ball. None of them have shot the ball well coming out of that league.
Even so RJ Hampton before that. I mean, RJ Hampton was another guy like just completely struggled, and he was what? I think he was he not top 17?
RJ Hampton struggled offensively, and you look at him on the tape in those games, he does stand out athletically, but you know, speed, leaping ability, those are things we want to look for in prospects. But when you are going up against guys who can defend you, who can body you up, who aren't gonna fall victim to a lot of the tricks you try and pull out from your sleeve, it becomes a problem when you try and score over that type of physicality, that type of aggressiveness. And so I'm gonna give Rupert a little bit of a pass for that stuff, but the offense is murky. The defense, however, the defense is freaking special, man. That guy is going to be able to defend multiple positions at the NBA level and potentially lock down multiple positions at the NBA level. And that, to me, is the key. It's one thing if you're coming into the NBA and you're struggling with how to adapt to the speed of the game, the physicality of the game. You're just trying to fit in as like a team defender, right? Those guys are going to struggle mightily regardless out of the gate, because in order to be a good team defender, you have to have that chemistry built with those players for years and years to figure out where your other guys on the team like to be, where their best position is, how you fit with them, and then ultimately adapt to the scheme, or schemes, I should say, that your coach wants to employ on the defensive side of the ball. But these guys who can be individual, standout, one-on-one defenders with these types of physical tools, for lack of a better phrase, they don't grow on trees, man. They're not as readily available as we may think. And it's that reason why I would still hold on to Rupert as a top 20, or like worst case scenario, top 25 guy. And if for whatever reason he would fall outside of that range, I'm like the Pistons at 31, for example, boy, am I running up to the freaking podium to try and get somebody like that, because they just aren't as available. So I tried to pump up Rupert as best as I could, but I also prepared the audience for, I think, some of the things that you're going to bring to the table as to why you aren't as high on Rupert.
Yeah, I don't think the offense is horrid. I'll be honest. It's bad. Like it's, I think there's a difference between horrid and bad. I was actually going to ask, like, lead with a question. What is the best thing he does on offense?
As of right now, you would think it's him in transition, right? Running out, filling lanes, and then finishing at the basket. The problem is he doesn't technically rate out highly on transition finishes or cuts to the basket either.
That's true. So I had strength on offense, which, by the way, I agree. It's not good, but I think there's a difference between horrible and bad. But I wrote down strong going to his left on attacking the rim. That was the strength I had on offense. So I'm with you on the offensive struggles. Like, I will say this though, you made a lot of great points, and I don't have, like, he's one that I'm really going to spend some time on again, because I believe that I'm probably wrong at 35. But again, you made a good point. You just had him in, close to the lottery, and you moved him into the 20s recently. So it's like, so if you're doing that now and it's April, like, you're going to have another 2 months, almost literally 2 months from next week, to be like, wow, that stuff looks even worse. Like, and obviously it can also go the other direction. But the point I had was everything you said about defensive, like, I'm there. I'm not going to repeat myself, or I'm not going to be an echo. I think what's really important to know, and why I think I'm wrong at 35, you mentioned if you're the Pistons at 31, like, if I'm any team in the 30s and he's there at 25, you need to be trading up, like, now, yesterday. It doesn't matter. Let's go. Like, let's go get him. Because I think the motor is so important, and I think his motor is insane. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, really important for a guy that has those kinds of, you mentioned was a guard before, and now, like, so he knows what to do with the ball, and he's starting to realize that he has that kind of length and size. And I almost feel like he's gotten more of a leash than most guys do in the NBL, but I also think it's partly because I think guys eventually just realize they're talented, and that's why I think the transition's a little scary.
He's run a lot more pick and roll sets than I would have thought. When I went to
Correct.
go back and look at the numbers and look at like what his play types actually broke down to in terms of attempts within those play types, yeah, he ran a lot more pick and roll than I would have thought.
Than most guys did. I mean, obviously LaMelo is, like you mentioned, the poster child example of they're going to hand him the ball and he's going to do whatever the heck he wants for 6 months.
LaMelo's going to do whatever the hell he wants regardless. But
that's exactly what happened.
That being said, sure.
I think the shot's good. I do think it's I think it's there. Like, I think the framework of being raw and having tools is something that you can just kind of throw around. But I think if your shot doesn't scare me initially at, what is he, 18 or 19? Let me just make sure I have that right. I have this really cool thing. Just, this is shout out to my mother-in-law. This is so random, but I have this really cool thing in my spreadsheet where I actually post draft age. I don't post draft age. I post current age in case someone has no idea how old the person is.
So Rupert is currently 18, but he will be 19 by draft time. Day. His birthday is May 31st.
I have this cool thing in my spreadsheet she added where based on the day that I open the spreadsheet, it actually updates their birthday live, which is really awesome. It's amazing. And that's why whenever I'm like, I know their birthday, hold on. Let me go find it. And it's right here. So he's 18, going to be 19. So like, I understand. It's like, Ousmane Dieng was a perfect example last year of, it's like, don't be surprised if because of this and this raw tool, here's where he goes. And I think Rupert is going to fall into that same exact bubble. And I don't want to be, lazy and say that, but I think the shot is the reason I wanted to land the plane with the strength was, I think the shot form is good. And if it doesn't scare me at 18 years old, because I think that's part of where you mentioned he was a guard before, I do think it's a little slow, but I think it's there, and I think that's going to be the thing he grows into as a shooter because he's like can be this beautiful 3-and-D. You mentioned like complete ball stopper in the NBA on defense. So I think if that, the 3-and-D wings are just this thing that teams are drooling over and pushing each other over for, and I think he's going to fall right into that mold as long as that shot continues to develop, which I think it will.
But the 3 does have to be there to a certain extent at some point. Yep. So
yeah,
one of the best things I did for No Ceilings this draft cycle is I actually took a deeper look into guys who are playing 20 or more minutes in the NBA, which essentially equates out to like a top 8, top 9 rotation role.
Okay.
What actually goes into those players playing 20 plus minutes a night? Like, what are some of the commonalities for them, at least on the offensive end? And we hear it talked about like all the time, like all of our favorite, big time media shows, whatever the case may be. They're all talking about shooting is at a premium in the NBA. I truly believe that. And the numbers actually do bear that out. The guys who are holding on to these legitimate rotation roles and aren't above average offensive players or around that average mark, they're essentially below average in a number of major categories, including 3-point shooting, including shooting from the field overall. They're some of the best defenders in the league. Or they have been some of the best defenders in the league. Can Rupert be that guy? He has that type of ceiling, which is why we're having this conversation in the first place. But if he does not replicate that defensive value that we're expecting him to have, at some point, you have to be able to shoot the ball and do something more than just, hey, I'm going to cut to the basket, you're going to find me, and that's the only way I'm going to generate offense. Because if that's who you are and you're closer to Matisse Thybulle than something else, guess what? You're not going to have a consistent role in the NBA. And for all that Matisse has done on the defensive side, he was a draft pick where he was for a reason. But I also had to watch him enough in Philly where if he didn't get the ball on a straight line in transition, get the hit-ahead pass, or he wasn't cutting to the basket, he was providing you zero offensive value. It was 4-on-5 on that end.
I'm on record as a Matisse Thybulle hater, so let's just this is a beautiful example, and yeah, thank you.
But that's the worry with Rupert. That is it's a legitimate worry. But I'm hoping that because of Rupert's priors as a guard,
yep.
I'm hoping that can carry over in a positive voyage. I think you have the same hope as well, which is why we're a little bit closer on Rupert now.
So also another thing that, and it's like we mentioned earlier, I don't want to deadbeat some points, but it's a little bit about like how you improve as an evaluator. I used to value college, and I do still value college production throughout earlier in the year. And as we get later in the year and evaluate some of the Ruperts of the world, where can I go? Okay, well, the NBA skill is defense, and that defense is way better than Jalen Wilson's will ever be.
Yep.
Then why can't those two balance each other out if Jalen Wilson's offense isn't actually going to translate very well? So it's almost like not saying these guys are going to flip from 18 to 35, but honestly, that's basically what we have for each example. It's like you have Rupert around where I have Jalen Wilson, and I have the other way around, whatever, right? on both these guys. So it's honestly something that probably happens here for me in the next few months, and understanding where those guys are and what's valuable for them. And that's one thing, like I said, I always harp on NBA skill. And it's the thing that I agree with you. That defense is super legit and super translatable, which is why I didn't have a big forced argument for him, because I do think it's legit. And I do think I also value where you play and how you play. And I love the NBL. I think it's an unbelievable place. That's also why I was a Luka guy. I was like, well, this guy is 17 years old. And I think I literally, shout out to The Athletic. I'll have to find the article if I can. They posted it maybe last year, and it was like what he did at 13 years old, basically against grown men. I was like, unbelievable piece. But just that's why guys like that are successful, because they literally play against grown men that are 2 times my age currently. And he's an MVP in a league that's, he's 17 years old, an MVP that's probably the second or third best league in the entire world other than the NBA. I wonder if that's valuable.
Spoiler alert, it usually
is. Yeah, the NBL, it matters. And I think that Rupert is, I think if he's anywhere else, I think we're going to be trying to figure out maybe nitpick him a little bit more. And I'm really glad that he's in a place that I have to value that production. And I think he has been that defensively. So again, I don't want to force hey, I have him at 35. It's honestly sometimes just the casualty of guys around him. And I know that sounds bad, because I like Julian Strother more than him consistently on both sides. Andre Jackson's one I'll have to kind of really play around with after seeing him in person this year. Filipowski now, and just to give you an idea, April 1st, right? I think Flip's announcement was last week, so Flip is automatically gone. So if you're just going off of that alone, that's another spot for Rupert, right? Slauson's ahead of him. Tubelis is probably somebody that I probably had a little too high. Kobe Buffkin did pass him eventually. I'm just throwing out some names. Jalen Clark, Chris Murray. These are all guys that I feel so about in some areas. And if Rupert's defense is that good, I'll do another deep dive and I'll go, well, that's why it's more valuable than this guy ahead of him. So
That's absolutely all fair points that you just brought up, for sure. Okay, so let's move into the last 2 guys that we're going to talk about. One comes with a caveat, though, because I want to hear about your thoughts, not just on D'Moi Hodge, but your thoughts about Portsmouth in general, man. We have a first-time Portsmouth Invitational Tournament watcher in person. I love it, man. The Portsmouth Invitational, anyone out there listening to the audience, if you have not had the chance to go to that event, I promise you, it's like Summer League for sickos, is essentially
a great way to put it.
So it's a high school gym, completely open environment. Anyone who's anyone's just walking around. You can bump into, rub elbows with anybody, and you're watching as many live basketball games as you can get for your money's worth. You pay one admission price at the door, you get access to all the day's games, and it runs exactly like Summer League, except you're not watching Paolo Banchero and Chet Holmgren at Portsmouth. You're watching guys like D'Moi Hodge and Tamani Kamara and Serge Jabari Rice and Justin Mutz and all of these guys who are seniors or super seniors, and they're trying to earn spots essentially to the next combine, the G League Elite Camp, and then hopefully earn a spot at the NBA Draft Combine, where maybe, just maybe, they could get drafted in the second round or possibly even higher in the 2023 NBA Draft. So that's the idea of what Portsmouth is. Somebody like myself, I'm in heaven when I go to that event. Maxwell has not been to Portsmouth yet. I guarantee if Maxwell went to Portsmouth,
it breaks my heart he hasn't. It really does.
That man would not leave that gym. He would literally pitch a tent and have his George Foreman grill go and have a camp out in that gym. And
he might be better off in that tent than some of the hotels nearby, I'll be honest. But
he would just love life for 4 days. But that being said, Trevor, what were your thoughts about Portsmouth? And then you can sort of pivot those directly into what you thought about D'Moi Hodge.
So I did not prepare this, but this is actually hilarious, and I'm glad you said it the way you did, where anybody who's anybody's just walking around. It's about the only place in the world that I think I can think of where in a span of 5 minutes you can be at a urinal next to Brent Barry, and then 5 minutes later you can be handed a card from a shark agent, just in a matter of 5 minutes, and then 5 minutes later you're getting a hot dog that's not a hot dog probably. And it's honestly such a beautiful environment. I am from only about 2.5 hours down the road, so when I forgot the thing existed. I knew about it from in the past, and then really getting into this, trying to do this professionally, I was like, Portsmouth is right down the road from me. I was like, let me not be dumb and let me go.
You gotta go. Yeah, you gotta go.
So again, why it breaks my heart that Maxwell, I know he's in Chicago, but just go. I figure it out. It's just even if it's for Friday, Saturday. Honestly, I would recommend Friday, Saturday, because you do actually get to see everybody. Like that's the cool
Yep.
thing, the way they do it. And obviously it's not, it's third place games, it's consolation bracket prize games, things like that. But you get to see everybody at least once. And that was what was really valuable. But it was awesome to see guys twice. Like, I think D'Moi I got to see twice. I think Jelly Walker, I guess they're on the same team. So perfect. I would have gotten to see them twice. But just to kind of summarize the Portsmouth thing before we talk about him in specifics is you made a good point where it's like the environment is nothing like any other. And I am in the camp of like, I hope it never leaves the area because I know that it is not the most beautiful gym in the entire world. I will be, no offense to Portsmouth, no offense to Churchland High School, but it is, I have been to nicer places. I will tell you the truth, but it's really neat because it's not, you're not distracted by anything. You're there and you're there to watch basketball and have a great time. And honestly, it really helped someone like me who wanted to talk to people. And I got a chance to do that. But shout out to Global Scouting from SI, really nice guy. But, just to be there and to really enjoy the environment, it's honestly perfect. I was able to sit courtside every game. Like, it doesn't make sense to be able to be like, oh, here's this really cool angle of Connor Vanover I was able to get. And not that I'm evaluating his jump shot, but it's like, I'm not just an evaluator. I'm also a content creator. I hate to say that term out loud because it does sound cliche, but I'm there to enjoy it and get something positive out of it. And I got the fact that there was good access to guys that I would never have seen otherwise unless I was going to Missouri games, going to UAB games. I'm just throwing out a couple of them. Going to Toledo games to see, guys like JT. Is it Shumate?
Shumate, yep.
Shumate, yeah. I am known to be the mispronunciation guy in my community. So let me just throw that out there now. There are some names I will not get right today. But just to be able to be in an environment like that and for it to mean something for the area and for it to mean something for seniors because they otherwise wouldn't get that invite, that would be my like, hey, it should always be there. And
it's great. It's great for the area. All the teams are sponsored by local businesses. That's right. Right. Yep. And so it really does help that community.
Mike Duman Auto Sales. I'm just reading a couple here. Janie
Did you go to Roger Brown's?
I didn't. I got in Friday before the game.
Trevor.
I'm going to plan it better next year. I know.
Yes.
Going to plan it better next year. I did hear there was like a 3-hour wait on one of the days though. So
that's exactly why you get listen. You got to make your reservations in advance. You got to get that table. Well, if you just try to show up at Roger Brown's,
you're not.
Anyone who's anyone in the NBA is going to that restaurant one of those nights. So definitely. Yeah, if you go to Portsmouth, got to do yourself a favor. Get to Roger Brown's. That's a must. But that being said, that was a great recap of Portsmouth. Just one more selling pitch for me to everyone out there. Pay attention to that event. There are always NBA players that come from that event. I promise you, there will be guys.
Rick Barry is the famous one. Brent's father, literally was. Is it father? I hope it's father. At this point, all the lineage stuff messes me up. But he.
I'll do you one better. Jimmy Butler was a Portsmouth alum.
That's a great point.
Talking about a guy who can literally win you a championship potentially came from Portsmouth. So. All right, we have sold that event enough. They can pay me for the marketing later. But all right, D'Moi Hodge, 24.5, 6'3" guard, 3-and-D mold, right? Not your prototypical point guard in that he's going to be a high volume pick and roll guy or a high volume creation guy for others, but he is on the floor to score effectively from all parts of the floor, right? To be an off-ball guy, but then also to defend his position. And yes, he's an older guy. He went the JUCO route. He certainly rose up from the ranks and made it to a high major college situation, which he took advantage. He took the most advantage of out of a lot of these other guys at Missouri. He had a spectacular year. They had a better season than I think anyone initially would have pegged them to have early on in the SEC. They got upset in the tournament. I was a little disappointed with their tournament play. I thought they could make it pretty decently far. I actually had them picked in my bracket, but nevertheless, D'Moi Hodge is a guy who I have him 58 on my board. So we're talking like back end of the second round, like, buddy, he's barely on your big board. So why are you focusing on him for a podcast topic? Because as Trevor's about to tell us, he tore up Portsmouth as he tore up the SEC all year long. So why does Hodge need to be talked about a little bit more in NBA draft circles?
So I told somebody this yesterday. I think it was Phil Dexter, guy I work with and fond of. I said I went in with a list, and I don't want to do this all the time, but I went in with a list because I'll be honest, like whether Maxwell's article is worth reading all 10,000 pages of, it's very good. There's guys on there that I'll be honest, like some of them didn't play, some of them this, some of that, whatever. It's just like, all right, you have to have a list and you have to know exactly what you're there for. Like that was how I looked at it. I'm like, I want to go and I want to see X, Y, and Z guy, whatever, right? D'Moi was on the list. I also had a second list where I was like, there need to be guys where like, the list was blank, and I sit down and I'm like, who after each day, and I was only there Friday, Saturday, or each game, where I'm like, why were they not on the first list? Like, why am I here and not going, oh my God, this guy is jumping off off the court from me? And D'Moi was one of those guys. Yes, he's on the first list, but he jumped off the page, like jumped off this play. I was like, okay, oh my God, what are we doing here? Why are we talking about, is it, again, help me out, Dayton's pronunciation, Toumani Camara. I get that he was probably unanimously the best guy there. D'Moi really fought that argument, I will say. Like, I just from a standpoint of like, let me just give you some raw counting stats really fast. I still have all the sheets. I like to be proud of stuff like that. 7 for 12. This was I think they won this game. Yeah, this is their win on the 15th. I believe this would have been for third place. 20 points, 7 for 12 from the field, 6 for 10 from 3, 6 rebounds, 3 blocks, 1 steal in 36 minutes. If you just told me that, I'd be like, well, yeah, that's pretty good. It was better than that. It was just whenever you look at, and this is where we're going to talk about him as a prospect. I've never seen a guy so lanky and so like, I will say the frame and the body, if you want to just start out with a weakness, like he's 6'3", 0.75, I think is what it had listed at with shoes.
I was a little disappointed that he measured in under 6'3" without shoes. Like when you think of a 3-and-D off-ball player, you're thinking, well, they're primarily going to play on the wing, which means they're going to guard wings. Like, yeah, you want like 6'4", 6'5", potentially even like 6'6" if you're that off-ball guard. He is smaller. So if you're going to play him next to somebody else in the backcourt, you probably want them to be of plus positional size. But I don't think that takes away from the type of player that he is and the type of mentality he has on defense, because that man will get up in your grill. He will play you low and tight on defense, and he will take that ball away from you, or he will get up out of nowhere and do a chase down block or block a shot. Or he is a quicker guy, a more athletic guy than you would give him credit for. So yes, the size is a concern, but with what you're going to keep saying, he doesn't play like he's that small.
No. And that was, so I wrote down pressures the ball well in full court. That was something that's more consistent, because I think we get caught up in some of the styles that colleges play. And I got a very good opportunity this year to watch NC State do it a lot. Like I said, being here in Raleigh, they were Missouri to a T, like, and vice versa. They played full court press defense, consistently. So I was familiar with seeing it, and I noticed he didn't do it as much, and obviously that's the part going back on the coaching, and they didn't press a lot this tournament. But I know he can do it. Missouri did it. They were insane. They just blitz people, right? And I got to a point where just seeing him move, and I'm trying to think about defense and separating it from offense. He's super fast. I mean, just I don't know if they measured speed. I really didn't even look at the second page of that measurable stuff, but super, super quick. And I got to a point, I don't want this to get taken out of context or be funny, but I got to a point where at one point I would watch him again. Why I think where you are on the floor is so valuable, and I'll give a quick story on that in a second. But I got to a point where about 2 minutes at a time, I just watched his feet. Like, I just literally watched his feet on defense and on offense. I just sat there, hands on my cheeks, and I was like, back and forth. Like, it doesn't make any sense. His leg size and the shape and the way he moves them, and that ties back into why I'm think he's going to end up being in my top 60. Spoiler. Moves well off the ball, super, super quick, and just the ability of the jump shot was unbelievably good the whole weekend. And I know that can happen in spurts, but the style of the shot, the way it looked, the form, the frame, everything that was very, very good, and I was very, very impressed overall. And I think he's, again, the size and the measurables are, again, we can agree, are very scary for what we want him to be as a 3-and-D player. But I think he's got enough of a motor to care to put the effort in and to make up for it and be a small NBA guard that can pick your pocket consistently.
I will do you one better than just the motor to be an NBA guy. And I don't want this to sound harsh, or I don't want this to be taken out of context.
I just told you I look at his feet for 2 minutes. Nothing's going to sound interesting, okay? Like, it's...
D'Moi Hodge plays like a guy who is very self-aware. Right? He knows that he's an older guy coming in. He knows that he doesn't have the flashy creativity that some of these other guards do that are in a similar position or above him on big boards. But he's very self-aware in that he has taken to master skills that will get him drafted, if that makes sense. So make shots, from where you can get the ball on the floor. Check. Be able to get downhill, finish at the basket efficiently. Check. Be able to cut to the basket well. Check. Play in transition. Play up and down basketball. Check. Hit jump shots from all over the floor. Check. Play point of attack defense at an incredibly high level. Check. These are all things. They sound simple. They sound very little, but they're also skills that NBA teams need at a premium, and they're skills that will get you drafted. And so that, to me, that's a perfect way to sum up D'Moi Hodge. The other perfect way to sum up D'Moi Hodge is just read you some of the numbers in which he rates out at. So to back up what I said so that I'm not just feeding the audience a line of baloney here, 88th percentile in transition scoring, 91st percentile on spot up, 67th on cuts, 99th percentile operating out of handoffs. In the limited pick and rolls he ran, he still made 3 of 7 shots out of those, 92nd percentile out of pick and roll, 91st percentile on jump shots overall, 87th percentile on catch and shoot shots, 79th percentile on all jump shots taken off the dribble, 82nd percentile finishing around the basket. That sounds like an NBA player to me. And maybe it's not one that you feel you have to take inside the top 45. I get it. But if you're an NBA team and you're sitting there in the 50s and you're looking for somebody who can potentially fill a spot on your team, right? Come in, maybe he's the 10th, 11th man, whatever the case may be, has a chance to play himself up higher in that rotation. But you're looking to get a guy at that spot on the cheap or on a team-friendly contract.
Yep.
Why are you not calling up D'Moi Hodge? Whether it's you take him with a draft pick or you get him on the phone, you figure something out after the fact on like a 2-way undrafted deal.
100%.
Why is he not one of your prime targets to bring in, be like, hey, we're going to give you this contract. We believe in you. Here is a very reasonable deal for both sides. Let's bring you in. Let's see what you got. And if you prove to be the type of player we think you can be, let's upgrade you to a guaranteed contract. Let's get you in. Let's be all in with you, D'Moi. Let's see what you can do. That if I was running an NBA team, that would be something that I would want to do in this draft. So you, again, that can be a number of different ways to go about handling that process. But either way, bringing him in the building and giving him an opportunity to prove that he can do everything that he's done in college at Portsmouth on an NBA floor, I think would be a very smart risk for an NBA team to take.
Yeah, I think it also, you have to give credit to his coach, Coach Gates, because I think that putting him in that position to be successful was really important for this year specifically. Yep. You mentioned the JUCO stuff as well. I don't have much more because I think all of that stuff is kind of just like you said. It's actually a beautiful way to sum it up, is like all of the strengths just kind of like work well together. Right. Yeah. And that's obviously what gets him drafted. And I honestly think what probably happens for the sake of both parties is I think he falls into that mold where he's the first guy that we get a Woj tweet from on draft night, where it's like D'Moi Hodge has signed with X team because it fits his camp very well. It fits the team very well. And it's honestly, you hear about stories. I learned last year, I talked to somebody, I think, was it JD Davidson that got drafted by the Celtics? Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
I talked to somebody who was somehow knew what was going on with that situation. And I was very surprised, and I knew that guys did this, but like the whole turning down a draft pick thing, basically like, don't take us. We want to pick our team, in 5 minutes after the draft's over and work out the details. I had to get used to that because honestly, it's something that I was very unaware of for a long time. And like, I know J.D. Davidson was drafted, but like they wanted to not be drafted more than they wanted to pick the team he was going to instead. And that was a good example, but just of a last year guy. But I think D'Moi will be deservingly should be drafted. I said that to somebody this weekend. But also at the same time, I'm not shocked if they're like him and his agent are like, no, we want to pick exactly where we're going so I can get the ball and it be something that develops me better. And I think he will deserve whichever happens.
Absolutely 110% fair. So that is our D'Moi Hodge pitch for everyone in the audience. Pay attention to him. Watch some film back on him. I promise you're going to come away with some of the same thoughts that we've shared. If he ends up being a poor man's Marcus Smart, isn't that a player you kind of want on your roster? Somewhere on your roster to be able to look down your bench and say, if I could potentially bring in that type of player and put him on the floor, like, why not? You're kind of laughing and chuckling. Is that like a comp that you're like, Nate,
no,
you're off your rocker or what?
No, I'm just trying to figure out what a poor man's Marcus Smart is. Like, I like to think of the actual guy.
It's D'Moi Hodge. That's what that is.
I think you're right. Smart wasn't like, I mean, I wasn't jumping off the page when, and granted, he was a good defender in college, but I wasn't like falling in love. And I'm not fully in love with D'Moi Hodge's defense either, but that's okay. And man, that is a really good one.
Marcus Smart was a fantastic talent in college. He was the definition of do-it-all player for Oklahoma State. Went to the Boston Celtics at that spot for a reason. Has played spectacularly for Boston. No matter how many times some of the fans may have wanted to pull their hair out because of some of the things that Marcus Smart does on the court when he has the ball in his hands a little too often. You want Marcus Smart on your team, period. And I want somebody like D'Moi Hodge on my team.
I like it now that you say it, because I'm sitting here looking at their measurables and just to make sure I'm at least in the same headspace with the comp. And this is such a small document, but like the wingspan would be the only thing that would scare me a little with D'Moi, with it being, I think it was just under 6'6", but who cares? I think that's a perfect analogy, and I'm going to pencil that one in for a good like way to compartmentalize him. And honestly, I maybe like him better now.
Hopefully, when I say that, I'm not giving our own Tyler Rucker, our resident Boston Celtics fan, a heart attack by using Marcus Smart's name with any prospect. Hopefully, I'm not. Hopefully, Tyler understands where I'm coming from. But all right, last guy that we'll quickly touch on, because you essentially wanted me to give you a selling pitch on him.
Pretty much.
If this were to be our original plan of, hey, Nate, you're coming on the Two Pointers podcast. We flipped around our schedules a little bit and did this, but I'm still going to give you the sales pitch. So Bilal Coulibaly, right? I have said this man's name a ton over the last few weeks. I'm going to probably keep saying his name a ton, but for good reason. He has moved up to 12th on my personal big board. So Trevor, I'm going to give you a sales pitch. You stop me when I've sold you on him being a potential top 20 all the way up to lottery prospect. Okay. 6'6", possibly 6'7". I think he has at least a +3, +4 wingspan. Could potentially be even longer than that. Moves his feet as well as almost any other wing that I've evaluated in my time doing this. So that's going back to the 2011 NBA draft, was when I really started to get my feet wet in the evaluation process. That's 12 years. Some of the best feet I've seen. Best Euro step I've seen from a pure wing in the time I've been doing this evaluation process. Can handle the ball at his size, can get downhill, can create shots for himself. Not only finishes around contact and over guys, but finishes through them. And in turn, on defense, he absorbs contact incredibly well. So he's strong. He's built well. I mentioned the size, the measurables, the speed, the foot speed, the lateral mobility. He moves his hips really well. The jump shot, he does have to speed up that puppy on spot up shots. I'm not going to argue against that, but he's shown improvement in the spot up game. He can be a catch and shoot guy. He's shown improvement as a pull up jump shooter. And then you take into account what he did in the junior division this year. So he has not been playing up with Victor in the A League for Met 92. He was in the junior division, but in that junior division, 22 points per game, over 6 rebounds, 2.5 assists, efficient shooting splits from all over the floor, over 2.6 steals, I believe, 1.2 blocks, 29.1 PER, 62.7 true shooting percentage. Did any of those things jump out at you and say, we should probably take him a little bit more seriously for the 2023 NBA draft?
So that's what's beautiful about this process. Taking him more seriously and having him at 12 are two completely different things, which is why, by the way, I see
that's
it.
fair.
Like,
that's completely fair.
But the beautiful thing about this whole process is, like, I'm never going to be like hating somebody for where they have somebody, because it's ultimately their opinion. Now, granted, listen to what they say, and if it sounds ridiculous, then call it. If it's just what you say earlier, a duck is a duck, it walks like a duck.
Sir, you can say that I'm ridiculous at any point in this podcast. You, 100%.
I think calling something, if it's a spade, I think I grew up on the term. It was like, if it's a spade, it's a spade, or whatever. Call a spade a spade. But I'm never going to devalue someone's opinion unless it sounds like they're off their rocker. And you just gave me 12 things. I think if I wrote them all down quickly enough, I think you gave me 12 things that I'm going to now go back in, and I'll just give you the 3 things I had written down. One of the most shiftiest, quickest side-to-side movement players I've ever seen.
NBA movement patterns for a wing. Check. Yep.
Period. Yeah, I had that written down. Shifty, speed, great in transition. One of the best I've seen do that in a long time. And I think it almost falls into that same Rupert, like, lazy analogy where it's like the raw talent is there, and I think some of that stuff will get better because I think the fact that he's so young is so important for his development. If you just laid out a great case of, like, if he's doing this stuff now, what can he do with NBA players around him?
So it's not just the things that I listed out, Trevor, but I think the most important thing that I didn't touch on, I was waiting to touch on it, but I just wanted to get some of your thoughts, and you're going to keep giving me your thoughts, but he doesn't play like an 18-year-old. He operates within the flow of the offense completely, and he understands the sets that are being run, the sets that are being called, where he's supposed to be within those plays, what he's supposed to be doing, really honestly on both ends of the floor. You don't see him out of place, or he never looks lost within any of the games that I've seen him. And I know that junior division tape, it's really hard to find. I understand if people haven't watched enough of Coulibaly, but now that he's playing up with Victor, we've started to see him really put it together in some of these games, and you can get a whole game's worth of Coulibaly next to Victor Wembanyama. You see him quite literally playing off of a guy who has generational level talent coming into the NBA. You can now see what he looks like alongside other good players, because that Met 92 team is good. They have guys who have been in the NBA next to Victor. They have guys who are very hopeful of getting to the NBA next to Victor. You obviously have Victor, and now you have a guy like Bilal Coulibaly. You're able to see him flow within the offense as well as the defense on both sides of the ball. He fits in at 18 years old.
No, and honestly, most of that stuff was what I had left, so that's perfect. The reason, and I'm glad you touched it very, very quickly in there at the beginning, you said the jump shot is a little slow, and that was one of the biggest glaring weaknesses was just if he's going to be in that frame, he needs to have the ability to, and especially I think that'll be where he grows into some of his on-ball stuff. I think some of the on-ball creation, you're going to have a faster jump shot for some of that stuff.
I actually like his pull-up jump shot from the mid-range. When he's fading to his right around the free throw line, he's able to rise up with that. I actually like the shot.
That one was actually very prevalent in the his end of year. I don't know if you call it. You guys do midterms, but like whatever his end of year.
We call the end of the year the finals over on No Ceilings, our YouTube channel. Yes, it's a shameless plug. No Ceilings.
That step to the right was but that step to the right was a lot of what was featured, and it was that okay, it's quick, and that's part of where the shiftiness comes from. Is I think that's fine, but as you grow out into your body and into your frame, I'm going to want you to take a three at the NBA level more consistently, and I think that's where I want to see it improve. But I know it can. I'll be honest, unranked because of stubbornness. And I told you this off recording. I said, he is there because I didn't want him to be there. I want him to just do another full year where he is and develop and then be like, why is he not the number 1 or 2 or 3 overall pick? Because I think next year is wide open.
That's the thing. That's the thing about why I have him ranked in the lottery now, why I have him at that 12th spot. So if he does not declare for this year, Trevor, and he comes back and we're looking at him as a 2024 guy, what's going to stop me from putting him preseason top 5 or top 6? And if I have him preseason top 5 or top 6, settle down a little bit. Settle down. I haven't done enough homework on the 2024 guys to say I'd put him number 1 on the board. I've
probably watched 8 of them. Yeah.
I'm crazy. I'm delusional, but I'm not that crazy and delusional. But that being said, if I'm still throwing out like top 5, top 6 range next year, why shouldn't I consider him for the lottery this year? Especially when I'm looking around some of the other guys in that range. I have questions about a lot of those guys, or those guys don't have the same measurables and physical tools as somebody like Coulibaly. And it's just, I went down that list that I read off to you, and I'm just checking boxes as I keep going. And the more boxes I checked, the more I was like, so he started out as a top 40 guy for me. Then he broke into the top 30. Then I got him top 25. Then I got him top 20. And then I'm just sitting there thinking, well, screw it. If I really do believe in him this much, and I'd be jumping at the bit to draft him, why am I not putting him in my lottery, right? My rankings shouldn't just be a reflection of where I feel in relation to consensus. They should be how I, pardon my French, fucking feel. They should be how I feel about these players. And that's why I have him as a top 12 guy. And I perfectly understand why you didn't rank him, and wherever you end up ranking him when you do your next edition of your board, I'll be curious to know. But I think people are going to start getting him. Maybe they don't get him in the lottery. Maybe they do, but I do think evaluators will start putting him closer to where I have him. I truly believe that over the next month.
So 2 things I'll end with on his just this whole conversation is that sometimes, and for my channel, that will be a loud beep noise. But it's all good, easy to fix.
It's like when somebody comes in the Zach Lowe podcast, and all of a sudden you gotta put
funny.
the producers to work.
It's so funny. I love Zach Lowe because he's like, I don't care, I leave it in, but it has to be blurred. It is great. I'm probably going to change that soon, but it is what it is. I don't care. So here's the point: is you made a really good point where you're like, well, here's all these things, and I told you at the beginning I like at least one NBA skill. You probably gave me 4 at minimum, of actual translatable NBA skills. So why I'm not having him there again? Thank you for understanding. It's the stubbornness of, again, going back to how people feel. Honestly, people are going to listen to this and they're going to.
I didn't have Kobe Buffkin inside my top 60 for the longest time because
Me neither.
I truly didn't believe that he was going to be a this year guy. And then the more the
I'm at 28
went
now.
along, the more Metcalf got in all of our ears about guys. I'm telling you, he's going to be the Dale and Terry of this draft class. And he kept on saying that in a group chat. And I'm like, shut up, Metcalf. Like, I don't want to keep adding to my board when I haven't even gone through enough of my top 60. But it just got to the point where he had to rise up my board. And now guess what? Kobe Buffkin, as of today, sits at 15 on my personal big board. And it's like, I get that you don't want to take these drastic leaps sometimes with these prospects, but at the same time, especially someone like me who I have a full-time job, right? I'm not able to watch 400 some players in the country like every single hour of the day and give my up-to-date, up-to-the-minute big board. But when I do sit down and I have a full body of work in which I can evaluate these players, at some point, I've got to just say, screw it. I'm going to put my personal pride aside. I'm going to give this guy the major jump on my big board because I care about doing my best to give a fair evaluation, but also to get that fair evaluation right. At some point, you just have to make the big move for the prospect.
And that was going to be the last point, was understanding why. Like, sometimes it's just if I believe in it, why shouldn't it be the case? And that was the Taylor Hendricks thing for me all year, was like, I kept watching Taylor Hendricks when he was still a sleeper. And I had him, like, I think in the late 20s, maybe early 30s. And I think my very first one in January, I didn't post outside of 30 just because I wanted to feel better about what I had finished through February, and actually feel like I fully watched the top 60. And I was like, why is Taylor Hendricks not a lottery pick? And then it kept getting, and obviously we know where he ends up now for most people. I think I have him, let's see, just to be safe here, I don't want to talk out of
I've got him 6, so
do I. 6,
so really high. Yep.
So it was one of those things where I'm like, if I believe it, why the heck is it not the case? And honestly, I told you about this off recording, but I got a text from my former co-host. He was like, what do you think about this Coulibaly kid? And I'm like, I'll be honest with you. I'd rather be honest than not. I was like, I'd be honest with you. I'm stubborn and don't want to put him in this year's class because I think he would it would be really valuable for him and where he gets picked if he goes back another year and does it. And like, I honestly would probably have him top 5 next year. No problemo. But honestly, after this conversation and after another look into some more things this coming week, as I finish the board for May 1st, he's going to be ranked. It's just a matter of where, because I have to do all this. Yeah, I have to basically delete all the guys that went back. So that's kind of a problem that I'm going to run into. But
which is fair.
And then it's the other example I give, just to make it not sound like, oh, well, we both have Taylor Hendricks at 6. I have Travion Smith at 11, and I've had him pretty much in the lottery all year. Had him in the back half of the lottery, and then ultimately had him in the 30s, late 20s, early 30s last year. I think he would have been a first-round pick, a guy I got to see more than 15 times this year. So he's somebody that, like, once I see him in people's, like, rankings, I'm like, wow, I'm not alone on that island anymore. People are coming along finally, or maybe there's some reasons why or why not for him. So it's another, like, sometimes if you just believe it, why isn't it the case? And that's another guy I like to give as the example, is I got to see him all year. I got to see the production. I know that I understand that he shoots under 40% from the field. I don't want to hear from anyone about it, but that's just another guy of, like, I think Coulibaly is that case for you. Just to give you a comp for me, Terquavion is the one for me, is in that same vein.
Well, Trevor, this was a beautiful podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed every single minute we've taken to record together. So thank you for reaching out to me to get together on a podcast in the first place. Now we ended up getting to do it here on Home and Away. Please tell the audience everywhere they can find you and everything that you are doing in the space, because it's not just one thing. You have your hands in multiple cookie jars. Let the audience know everything that you're doing, because they need to be following you. They need to listen to you, because I came away very impressed with you today as a scout, as an evaluator, and as a basketball mind. And so I feel like everyone's probably going to feel the same way. And so they need to know where to find you.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I know you said you've got what was that tweet? It was like 6 shows in 7 days or something. It's like that aren't your own. So
This
first of all,
this
thank
is
you for
this
the
is a
time.
grind this week, but
Yeah,
that nevertheless, it's basketball is a passion project, right?
100%.
That's what it is.
You mentioned the cookie jar thing. Yeah, the cookie jars, hopefully they start to get emptied here soon as the playoffs are starting to happen. College basketball, that one's completely empty, thank goodness.
Yep.
So I can at least be like, all right, 2/3 of my life is at least dedicated to 2 things now. The timing of it was really interesting, but obviously, like you mentioned, and 2-pointers and all that stuff will be for my channel. Obviously, it'll be on the screen and everywhere they are watching it. But for those that are listening on home and away, 2-pointers podcast is where I've been building for the last 2.5-3 years. It's what's given me some opportunities in this space, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. But also just at the poetic timing of literally not having any service at Portsmouth, and then realizing all of my stuff for House of College Hoops officially went live at a Starbucks in the middle of nowhere in Virginia was really cool. So, like I said at the top, officially now contributing to House of College Hoops as a writer, as well as a contributor to everything college basketball. Shout out to those guys and what they and now we are building over there, and just being able to just expand what I'm am capable of, hopefully, and to be able to cover a lot of really cool stuff recently. I'll just really quickly plug. I had Queens University men's basketball coach Grant Leonard on Friday. Shout out to Coach Leonard. I've had a relationship with him and some of his people for a while. Super excited to talk to him. That was really, really candid, really, really fun interview about some of the TBT stuff that he was involved in with Team Division II. The Queens, obviously, first year in Division I, and could have honestly won the ASUN if they did not run into the buzzsaw that was Kennesaw State. I do want to throw out there that they only lost by 1 in the tournament at Kennesaw State. So they really should have won that game and could have won that game. So just shout out to Queen, shout out to him, and just being able to do that opportunity. Got a lot of great stuff coming. Big Board will be on the first. Podcast will keep coming. The playoffs, I'm trying to squeeze in playoff games between work schedule stuff, and it's hard. And just I rewatch a lot of NBA stuff, so it's just really tough right now. And I'm excited. Like you said, the draft's coming. It's we're literally 2 months from like next whatever Tuesday or Wednesday.
We're almost there. The lottery's right around the corner. The combines are right around the corner, and there is no better spot to be up to date on all of that action than with No Ceilings. NoCeilingsNBA.com, free 99 Substack, as we all like to say. Please go make sure you're subscribed there for all of our written words. You can find us on Twitter at NoCeilingsNBA. Make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, No Ceilings NBA. You can also find it, I'm pretty sure, under No Ceilings TV. They search whatever you search No Ceilings NBA on YouTube. You'll find what you need to. Subscribe to our channel. We have all of our podcasts there in video form. We have player and coach and other personnel interviews up as well. We have all of our finals videos, the Trevor reference. If you need any quick video updates on prospects, need a quick film deep dive, we have all those videos up for you as well. And then, of course, you can follow me personally, Nathan Grubel, on Twitter at Draft Deeper, and you can find the Draft Deeper podcast wherever you get your podcast on this very feed. So make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcast. But until we meet again on this very podcast feed, thank you all for listening to this episode. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.